who Donald Trump wants leading the federal civilian workforce. A guy that has in public said he wants to make us to be villains.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
All right, so here we go. Sorry guys, I have to do this. Appreciate folks staying late. Are you good to stay late, or do you need to go ahead and head out?
I'm good, man. Let's talk about federal employees.
Let's talk about federal employees. Folks know I am now a former federal employee. I'm now a fellow with a federal agency, but I am not a federal employee anymore. But I have been a federal employee for 7 years. I'm a proud member of the American Federation of Government Employees, Local 1858. I have maintained my membership, and I will maintain my membership in my union, and especially as it is the target of significant attacks from the incoming administration. The incoming administration is seeking to cut the headcount of federal workers, seeking to roll back telework, seeking to implement Schedule F, which will replace a significant portion of the federal workforce, replace the merit system of hiring with with political cronies. I mean, it's just so many really bad things that the new administration wants to do to federal workers, including, I'm broadcasting out of Huntsville. We broadcast on stations all across the South, and we're heard all over the country online, and across the world online. But I'm broadcasting out of Huntsville, Alabama, where at minimum, 10% of workers in this city are federal employees. It's crazy. There are at least 21,000 federal workers in the city of Huntsville out of a workforce of some 217,000. Okay? That is a huge percentage, and my local union thinks that it's even more than that. They think that there are something like 30 to 40,000 federal employees in the city of Huntsville. So at minimum 10%, at most 20% of workers in Huntsville are federal employees, while this transition team is wanting to cut 50 to 75% of federal jobs, and our congressman, Dale Strong, is chumming it up with the people that are putting forward these suggestions. If their suggestions got through and these cuts happened as proposed, 50 to 75% of federal jobs eliminated, the city of Huntsville would undergo Great Recession plus level economic decline directly. Not even talking about, we're just talking about direct jobs loss. If you lose 5 to 10% of all jobs in your area immediately, then obviously that has knock-on effects, right? You're going to have people who can no longer afford to go out on the weekend. You're going to have people who, you're going to have a mortgage crisis. You're going to have people who can't afford their mortgage, who can't afford their rent, who get evicted. Homelessness will increase. I mean, it is a patently insane thing to be advocating for generally, but especially for the person who represents Huntsville, Alabama, which is Congressman from the 5th District of Alabama, Dale Strong. It is ludicrous. And my national president, Reverend Everett Kelley, was on C-SPAN last weekend talking about the ludicrosity, is that a word? The ludicrousness of some of these ideas. Here he is responding to some of the cuts, the 50 to 75% cuts that the transition team is saying that they want to make. Let's listen to this.
This time round, though, a whole new organization looking directly at this idea of cutting costs and cutting size of government, led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. When you heard about this effort, what went through your mind?
Well, I think it's a little asinine to even think of the possibility of cutting 75% of the federal workforce. I see it as a direct attack against veterans, of which I am a veteran myself, because of the workforce, about 642,000 of that workforce are veterans. So when you say you're going to cut 75%, that means it does a direct attack on veterans itself. And I'm appalled by that.
if the recommendations are made by the two gentlemen and the staff that they're going to use, and if cuts are made to either employee size or departments itself, what's the potential impact on those services that you talked about?
Well, I mean, it will be a drastic impact because, like I said, we are the ones that's making sure that Social Security checks are out on time, okay? You start cutting 75% of that, it's not going to happen. When we're making sure that
right. And I want to pause that for just a second because it's also important to remember that the Social Security Administration, which again is responsible for getting these Social Security checks out on time, is at the lowest staffing level in absolute terms, not relative to the population, the lowest staffing level in absolute terms in 50 years.
Wait, don't we have more people now?
We have so many more people than we had 50 years ago. The last time that the Social Security Administration had fewer employees was in 1970. That is insane. That is absolutely ludicrous. And the idea that you can cut 50% of the people that remain and not affect seniors who rely on Social Security is absurd. And of course, we can go down the list of federal agencies, and they all have the lowest staffing level in some amount of years, because actually, while the U.S. population has soared, the size of the federal workforce in general is the same as it was 50 years ago. Look it up. Look at how many people are federal workers in this country. The number is approximately the same as it was in 1974. That is, and so the idea that there are just this limitless amount of federal bureaucrats that are sucking on the government teat and doing less work than they ever have is silly intuitively, but then when you look at the facts, it's even more. It is completely belied by the facts. Let's continue.
Taken care of, you start cutting 75% of that, it's not going to happen. But the truth of the matter, okay, it's not that they're trying to make the government more efficient. What they're trying to do really in all essence is contract out these jobs so that, and when they do this, then it's a matter of not the patriotism that the people that I represent display, but it's about the bottom line. It's about making a dollar. Okay, and that's what it's all about, I remember, and
that's exactly right. And I want to expand on that for a second, because the it's just so, like, I just get so enraged by this, and that people are falling for this. Elon Musk is one of the largest federal contractors in the country. There are very few companies and people individually that benefit more from our tax dollars than Elon Musk. And so when we have companies like SpaceX, who are just replicating more or less what NASA did in the 1960s, NASA was doing basically what SpaceX is doing today. When we outsource work like that, we not only are paying for the salaries of the people that are doing this work, but we're also paying extremely high executive pay, right? We're paying for people like Elon Musk out of our tax dollars to be the wealthiest person in the world. I think that's crazy. We should be using those dollars to create more jobs and bring them in-house and have them done well by federal workers without having to go through these middlemen leeches like Elon Musk. Continue.
Employee. And I remember the saga when I was employed with the Department of Defense, when contractors was bidding on our jobs, bidding on various portions of our jobs, right? And the sad thing that I remember is contractors were charging the government $600 for a hammer, okay? This is the type of thing you get into when you start contracting out jobs, and things like that. It's not a cost savings at all, okay? But I would enjoy the opportunity to sit down with the administration to talk about how we make the government more efficient. Okay, we're not saying that it shouldn't be. We're saying that we should sit down and have those conversations. For instance, if you really want to talk about making the government more efficient, let's look at Medicare. Okay, I think that there's an opportunity that we could save about $60 billion there. When you look at the RS, let's look at that and let's have this conversation, because there's about $1 trillion savings when you start looking at those that will evade taxes just this year. So let's have those conversations and talk about how we can be more efficient.
Yeah, exactly. And then that Medicare thing, by the way, just to decode for people who hear this from like the business press a lot, he does not mean by cutting care. He means by allowing Medicare to negotiate for prescription drugs, which every other insurance agency is able to do, other single payer healthcare systems in other countries are able to do. But for some reason, we don't allow Medicare to negotiate for drug prices. It's just the craziest thing in the world that we allow these pharmaceutical companies to get away with this. Let's also talk about some of these other no, these are mostly telework myths and facts, but this is just so, it's crazy. I want to shout out the Social Security Administration because they have done a really good job at increasing the service of the Social Security Administration. Commissioner Martin O'Malley has done a good job. I actually reached out to the president of the Social Security Council of AFGE. She's agreed with some of these numbers that he's pointed out. On his way out the door, he cited some of the successes of his term. He said average wait times on the agency's 1-800 number fell from more than 40 minutes last November to 12.8 minutes last month. The ratio of people receiving retirement, survivor, or Medicare benefits within 2 weeks of applying hit a 4-year high. The time it takes to receive a disability hearing has fallen from 368 days last November to 280 days last month. And there's a 50% increase in employee survey participation and a 3-point increase in its employee engagement index. And so the Social Security Administration is moving in the right direction here, even as they continue to deal with this underfunding crisis that is put on them by Republicans and Democrats, frankly. Let's talk about telework. The C-SPAN host asked Reverend Kelley about this, so let's see what he says.
Earlier this week, it was Vivek Ramaswamy on the Sunday shows talking about this effort. I want to play you a little bit of what he had to say about it. Get your response.
Okay.
Washington, D.C. Here's the dirty little secret in the federal bureaucracy today. Most people don't even show up to work. So if you require most of those federal bureaucrats to just say, like normal working Americans, you come to work 5 days a week, a lot of them won't want to do that. And by the way, that creates a logic for many of those agencies being outside of D.C. in the first place. So these are, again, examples. It's a great point you just brought up.
So would you
sweeping
move,
changes we're able to make quickly.
You could move the Energy Department to Texas or to Pennsylvania. You could move agriculture somewhere else. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, look, I think that, yes, absolutely. But I think even bigger picture than that, many of these agencies should be downsized wherever they are. And for whatever does remain, move many of them out to be where they're more accountable to the people. And by the way, if you have many voluntary reductions in force of the workforce in the federal government along the way, great. That's a good side effect of those policies as well. And so our goal is not to be cruel, by the way, to the individual federal employees. Most of them, I do want to say this, are individually good people, and we want to be compassionate and generous in how we handle this transition. But the real issue is there's just too many of them. We don't need 4 million, and we shouldn't have 4 million civil servants who can't be or aren't even elected or can't be removed from their positions.
Mr. Kelley, that was him from earlier this week. What's your response?
Well, I think that, first of all, he should educate himself on federal employees. Because to call federal employees bureaucrats, to call federal employees deep state, in my opinion, is an indictment, right, against federal employees. Now, as I said before, the federal employees that you're calling bureaucrats are the nurses that take care of the veterans that's wounded. They are the Social Security workers. They are the BOP employees. They are the TSA workers that make sure that our skies are safe. They are the meat inspectors to make sure that the food we eat is safe. So to say you're going to cut them, without first of all analyzing, and see what the federal government really need, I think it's misguided. Okay, and so I welcome the opportunity to have a sit down to talk about how do we make the government more efficient. And to think that you can take the federal employees and D.C. workers inside of D.C. and send them out into the states to work, well, guess what? Only 15% of the federal employees work inside of D.C. They're already dispersed throughout the United States. Okay, so I just think that they need to educate themselves on what federal employees really do and where they are located.
My question is, all these
That's right. So let's pause it for just a second, and we'll come back to this clip in a second. But it's so crazy, these kinds of stuff. And AFGE, after this segment, put out a fact sheet addressing some of these claims specifically, because it's just completely false. So here we go. Myth. From Senator Joni Ernst on Fox News. We only have 6% of our federal workforce actually going into work every single day. The reality is 54% of federal workers work completely in person at jobs that require them to be on site each day. Think about, if you just think about what the federal government does, and you hear this, 6% of our federal workforce goes to work each day. If you hear that and you believe that, and alarms don't go off, right, then you need to, you kind of need to step back and evaluate, like, where am I getting my information? Why did I believe that so readily? Because think for just like 3 seconds about what the federal government does beyond these kind of talking points that you hear from folks like this. The federal government is the VA. The federal government is, like Kelly said, the Bureau of Prisons. The federal government is the TSA. The federal government is the commissaries on military installations. The federal government is the firefighters and the cops on military installations. The federal government is fast food workers, again, on military installations. The federal government is researchers on military installations and places across the country. The idea that you think that you could believe that really underscores your disconnection with reality. So the fact is that 54% of federal workers work completely in person at jobs that require them to be on site each day, because you can't be a nurse at the VA if you can't do that teleworking. It's just not possible. You can't do that. Only 10% of federal civilian personnel are in fully remote positions. Among the subset of federal workers who are telework but not remote work eligible, 61% of working hours are spent in person. Okay? Here's another one, a myth. If you exclude security guards and maintenance personnel, the number of government workers who show up in person and do 40 hours of work a week is closer to 1%. The fact, and again, like, is that like security guards and maintenance personnel? You exclude them, and the number of people that you get showing up to work each day is 1% of the federal workforce. If you believe that, you are completely disconnected from reality. Fact is, among those federal workers who are eligible to work for telework, more than half, 61.2% of regular working hours were spent in person.
Among those eligible for telework, right? I mean, because we've already established that the majority
are not eligible for telework.
Right. They are reporting every day.
Yeah. Myth. Nearly 1/3 of federal workers are entirely remote. Fact. Just 228,000 or 10% of the 2.28 million federal civilian workers were in remote positions where there was no expectation that they worked in person on any regular or recurring basis. That is from the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget report to Congress on telework and real property utilization from August of 2024. Okay? Myth. Here's the dirty little secret about our bureaucracy today. Most people don't even show up. Fact. Excluding fully remote workers, which are, again, only 10% of the workforce, federal workers are in the office for 79.4% of their working hours. And then the 20% that are done at home is still work. Like, you can work at home if you have a computer job, right? I mean, like, Why wouldn't we allow people to do that if they can? Here's another one, another myth. Service backlogs and delays, unanswered phone calls and emails, and no-show appointments are harming health, lives, and aspirations of Americans, said Senator Joni Ernst. The fact is that telework both increases employee engagement and helps recruit and retain workers who provide vital public services to the American people. And this is really important, because the Veterans Benefits Administration, their officials have said, this is in a report by the Government Accountability Office, said VBA officials said they also observed increased interest from job seekers looking for positions that offer more telework. However, VBA officials at multiple locations told us they are increasingly competing for talent with other federal agencies and non-governmental organizations that offer greater telework and remote work options, the GAO said. Our analysis of AES data found that in 2023, more employees intended to leave the VBA for work-life balance reasons, including greater telework flexibility, than in 2019. Okay? So if you remove the ability of federal agencies to utilize telework in recruiting and retaining talent, you will hurt the people that we serve.
And it still boggles my mind because we all know there are some jobs that can be done from home.
Right.
There are some jobs that can be done from home. And if they can be done from home, why not? Why not? I mean, I know that there's debates about how effective that is. But when we've looked at the research, it seems pretty clear that it's not having a harmful effect on folks. If anything, it's the opposite. Like you said, I mean, people want options. People are smart enough to know if their job can be done from home, and if they have to report to the damn office to do something they could have done at their house. They know that.
And management has a job to do, right? And if there is a problem with a certain individual employee with teleworking, then management has the latitude to discipline and guide them and supervise them.
That's management's job, is to make sure, right? And so...
Yeah, sorry. I believe that management should work. That's a hot take. I think they should have to do a job.
I mean, if we're going to have management.
Yeah.
If we're going to have them, that is what they're supposed to do, right?
Here's another myth. Our goal, and this is one that Vivek said, you heard in that clip. Our goal is not to be cruel, by the way, to the individual federal employees. We want to be compassionate and generous in how we handle this transition. Here's a quote from Russell Vought, Donald Trump's nominee to lead the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, and also a key architect of Project 2025, which, again, I thought that they were totally distinct things and that Donald Trump wasn't going to be implementing Project 2025 and that he didn't know anything about it. Well, here he is appointed one of the key architects. I mean, it's just insane. Here's what Russell Vought said, quote, "We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains." Okay? This is who Donald Trump wants leading the federal civilian workforce, is a guy that has explicitly and in public said he wants to make us to be villains. The nurses who care for veterans, postal workers who deliver Social Security checks and rent checks and things for small businesses, firefighters who protect our federal wildlands or whatever it's called. He wants us to be viewed as the villains, the Corps of Engineers.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Ha! Let's continue.
Working from home now. If they wake up and it's snowing, can they turn their computer off and go back to bed and still get paid for it?
You're asking me, that's really so far away from the truth. Only about 20% of the federal workforce has ever even worked remotely. The unguided truth, that are being pushed out to the American public is just so untrue. Only about 20% maybe has even worked remotely. So many of our employees, most of them, their job won't even allow them to work remotely. So to think that is just not true.
What's the policy work from home policy generally in the federal government as of today?
Well, it's a negotiation between the union and the agency, and whatever that negotiation, and it varies between agencies, and whatever that negotiated agreement is, we just expect to adhere to that, right?
Is it an average of you showing up once or twice a week? I've heard once a month. What's the truth there?
God, that's far away from the truth. And again, it varies. It's anywhere from a lot of times people are working remotely. 2 days out of the pay period, which is 2 weeks. Okay.
Okay.
The fact of the matter is, of the hours that federal employees have to work on site, over 80% of that time is on site. Of the 2,080 hours, okay, that an employee has to work, 80% of that time is right there on site. And so to have these misnomers to go out like this, I think that is an indictment against federal employees, and it shouldn't happen. And people that's making those comments, about federal employees, in my opinion, should not be leaders anywhere, because federal employees are being threatened. They're called names, and the idea, based on what I'm hearing, is to threaten federal employees so that they'll just quit and go home, right? That's not a leadership person to me.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. Now, this one I don't have much comments on, because really what Reverend Kelley says really speaks for itself. And that's about the Schedule F situation, where Donald Trump wants to convert tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of federal jobs from a merit-based hiring and retention system to a political appointee system. Now, I mean, look, you need political appointees, and when you win an election, it is therefore you have power. You have power to govern, and you have power to execute your agenda to a certain extent, right? But the idea that we should have hundreds of thousands more political appointees than we do now, beyond the people who are leading these departments, is really, we did the civil service reform for a reason.
I was about to say,
there was a problem, right? There was a problem with getting competent people in these jobs that was identified by both the American people and previously by the Congress, because Congress wanted to have an efficient federal service too. We wanted to have people who could do the jobs rather than people who just happen to be friends with the incoming administration. So here, Reverend Kelley got a question about Schedule F. Let's listen to his answer.
There was reporting in recent days saying that the president-elect has said in the past that we will reissue an order that released in the waning days of his first administration that ends merit-based hiring for a number of federal jobs that work on policy, instead creating a new class of federal employees, Schedule F, that could be hired and fired like political appointees. Can you elaborate on what that would do if that's enacted again?
Well, I think you're talking about maybe 500,000 federal employees that could be affected there, because what this administration wants is Schedule F employees that will be at-will employees that will be loyal not to the Constitution of the United States, but be loyal to whomever the president is. And, that do away with merit-based, that do away with expertise. You have a person, and you can probably see some of this now, you have a person that's running these organizations or in charge of certain agencies that's just based solely on friendship, okay? And not necessarily one that has the expertise to operate. And so you're going to have more of, cronyism, if you ask me. And that's why we are very concerned about that, because to replace federal employees, and if I can say this, I call, what is the Schedule F is for flunkies, fans, and, things like that, right? But that's exactly what we're going to have. And we shouldn't have, the government should never be based on, whether or not I'm loyal to you as an individual. But it should be based on whether or not I have the expertise to do the job that I'm hired to do.
I mean, how can somebody disagree with that?
Right. I mean, you're arguing that 500,000 workers in this country deserve less rights, that they should be fired at will. And, it reminds me of the debate we hear a lot about other public sector workers, teachers, and tenure, right? Because we hear this come up a lot. And when you go back and you look into it, what you find is tenure for teachers started in large part because of this exact problem, right? You get a new superintendent who'd get elected or appointed, and suddenly every niece and nephew and cousin that they had and church member that they had is getting the new teaching jobs, right? And you're laying off the teachers who were qualified, who were there doing the job. That was a very common phenomenon before tenure was established for education employees. Right. And it's the same kind of situation. So how that's populist to demand 500,000 workers get less rights, I don't know. Obviously there are folks who do not want these agencies or services to function properly. Yeah. And something that we have seen with the public sector, particularly, the last 5 decades or so in this neoliberal era, has been, a demonization of public sector workers, trying to drive a wedge between them and the rest of the working class, where they're trying to convince private sector workers to be mad at public sector workers. And we've also seen the public sector be sabotaged. You open the segment talking about the fact that, these agencies have higher workloads, higher populations of people to serve with less employees than they used to have, or the same amount of employees despite this record growth. So the agencies in the public sector is sabotaged. It is designed to not be as effective as it could be. It is designed to give poorer services to ordinary people. And then they point to this, right? After they sabotage these public sector systems, they then point to the evidence of their own sabotage as reasons to further privatize it, right? To make things actually even worse so that some folks can make a profit.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what this next clip starts to talking about, the idea that, I've sabotaged government work now. Look at how bad it is. Why don't you just give me the contracts and I'll do it? And, well, not me. I won't do it as the owner of this federal contracting company. I will have people do it, but then I'll make millions of dollars, speaking as if I'm Elon Musk, right? Let's listen to this. And this is the last clip here from Reverend Kelley on C-SPAN about outsourcing work.
Let's go to Christy. Christy is on with our guest. She's in Georgia, Democrats line. Hello, Christy.
Hey, yes, gosh, I am a federal employee. I work for the FAA. I am not a controller. There's so much I want to say, but you guys don't have time. I'm ex-military. I did Air Force, and then I went to work for the FAA as an electronics technician back in 1990. And what I can tell you is what I have seen over my 38 years with the agency. It seems like when I first came in, things were more efficient. And that being because it was everything was inherently governmental. Our parts that we received, we got those from Oklahoma City. They were repaired out there. Went long. They were outsourced to a vendor to have those repaired. The price of parts went sky high for us to repair our systems, our navigation systems. And what I have seen over my time was, I can tell you where the inefficiency has been. They cut some of the workers, and that being technicians, I think even some of the controllers at some point, and other occupations within the agency. But they had more layers of management. So you say to yourself, well, what does that do? Well, I'll tell you what that does. Nobody makes a decision. I mean, nobody. I mean, I go to my boss and I need something approved, and he can't do it. He's got to ask so-and-so, and then they've got to ask their management. And it's the most efficient inefficient way of doing business that I have ever seen.
Okay.
We have a union.
Christy there in Georgia, thank you for the perspective, Mr. Kelley.
You know, I do agree with the sister there. You know, there was a point when, you know, that was work that was considered inherent governmental work, and we began to contract out some of those jobs and those positions and things like that. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. You know, I have nightmares about the fact that, you know, some private contractors, they bid on jobs for the government, right? And they low bid, okay? They low bid those jobs, and then when it's time to renew that contract a year later, guess what? It's 3 or 4 times the size it was when they bidded on those jobs. And, you know, that's not efficient, okay? Because we know that the private contractor, especially when you start looking at service contracts, you know, we spend about $750 billion in those contracts to contractors, and only about $200 billion for federal employees. Okay, so to make the statement that, you know, contractors should be doing this work, it's not efficient for the government. You know, when you start bringing those jobs back inside of the government, then you see some efficiency and you'll see some cost savings.
So you're saying if you want efficiency, focus on federal contractors?
Absolutely. Federal jobs.
Federal jobs.
Federal contractors, especially the service contracts, we spend about $750 billion versus $200 billion for federal employees.
The Congressional Budget Office in April of this year saying 2.3 million workers are in jobs that represent 650 occupations, more than 100 agencies. And to your point, in FY 2022, $271 billion spent on compensation when it comes to those employees.
Yes.
How are they compensated compared to the the private sector?
Again, you know, we are about the pay gap is about 24%. Private contractors get paid 24% more than federal employees. Okay, and as I was saying earlier, we're trying our best to close that gap. We are constantly encouraging the administration, regardless of which administration it is, you know, that we need to close this gap.
And so that's another good point. You know, the idea that federal employees are costing the government so much more money is really, you know, again, belied by the fact that federal workers make less for the same work as private workers do in the same kind of field. So,
and I appreciate them bringing up the contracting situation. And, you know, I saw that with Huntsville City Schools when they outsourced jobs. You know, of course, it was to save money, quote unquote.
Right.
But it never actually saved money. The employees themselves were paid worse. That's true. And so there was some savings, you know, potentially there, but you have to factor in the middlemen.
Yeah.
Right.
The leeches
so
at the top.
Right.
The people who don't actually do the work, like Elon Musk.
Right. The people who own the temp staffing agency were getting their cut.
Yeah.
And so it did not actually save money. It did reduce the quality of services that was being provided to the schools. It also made it harder to recruit and retain people in these positions because, lo and behold, turns out when you take away what meager benefits the public sector has in terms of, you know, retirement and healthcare and things of that nature, it was harder to find people to stay in those jobs. You know, so it was a really devastating impact on students and educators and the community to outsource these jobs. And it's really, you know, it's mind-blowing to think that this is a model that we want to implement across numerous agencies and occupations and across the country. You know, the privatization just doesn't work for regular folks, but it does make a profit. Yeah. And I think that, you know, Reverend Kelley's correct to point to that. You know, ultimately, you talk about $270 billion in federal compensation or federal worker compensation. They see that as a big pot of money they want to get their hands in.
Right. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fg.